The crimson trail of her blood painted a stark path across the sun-scorched Arizona sand, a grim testament to how far she had crawled before her strength finally abandoned her. Willow Anderson lay face down in the desert, her once elegant ivory dress now torn and stained with both dust and blood, her golden hair matted with sweat against her pale neck. The midday sun of 1878 beat down mercilessly on her exposed skin, already beginning to burn and blister as consciousness faded in and out like the distant mirage of water that had tormented her for miles. The sound of approaching hoofbeats barely registered in her failing senses. She couldn't tell if it was real or just another hallucination brought on by blood loss and dehydration. But then a shadow fell across her face, blissfully blocking the punishing sun, and rough hands gently turned her over. "My God," came a deep voice, tinged with shock and concern. Miss, can you hear me?" Willow forced her cracked lips to part, but no sound emerged from her parched throat. Through blurry vision, she could make out the silhouette of a man against the brilliant blue sky, the brim of his hat creating a halo of shadow. Before she could focus on his features, darkness claimed her once more. Vaughn Keller had been tracking a small herd of wild mustangs for the better part of 3 days when he spotted what looked like a bundle of rags in the distance. Only when his horse, Midnight, began to sidestep nervously did he realize it was a person. Dismounting quickly, he rushed to the woman's side, his heart hammering against his ribs when he saw the blood. She was young, perhaps 25, with delicate features now marred by sun exposure and what appeared to be a bullet wound in her left side. The blood had mostly dried, but the wound still seeped. Without hesitation, Vaughn tore a strip from his own shirt and pressed it against her injury. "Hold on," he muttered, knowing she couldn't hear him. "Just hold on." With practiced movements, he retrieved his canteen and dampened a handkerchief, gently wiping her parched lips before drizzling a few precious drops of water into her mouth. He watched her throat work reflexively, swallowing the life-giving liquid. Vaughn knew the nearest town, Copper Springs, was at least a day's ride away, and this woman wouldn't survive the journey bouncing in a saddle. Making a swift decision, he gathered what little wood and brush he could find and constructed a makeshift shelter, using his bedroll and saddle blanket to create shade. Night was approaching, bringing with it the desert's bitter cold. He built a small fire and settled the unconscious woman as comfortably as possible, propping her head on his folded jacket. After cleaning and bandaging her wound as best he could with his limited supplies, he sat back on his heels and studied her face in the dancing firelight. "Who did this to you?" He wondered aloud, taking in her fine clothing, now ruined. She wasn't dressed like a local. Her attire spoke of Eastern money, perhaps even San Francisco or beyond. Her hands, though now scraped and dirty, showed no signs of hard labor. Vaughn decided then that he wouldn't leave her side until she was safe. Something about her vulnerability in this harsh landscape awakened every protective instinct he possessed. He had been wandering these territories for 5 years now, ever since returning from the war, purposely avoiding attachments and responsibilities. But in that moment, looking down at her pale face, he knew he couldn't simply deliver her to town and continue on his solitary way. "You're going to be all right," he promised the unconscious woman, settling in for his night watch. "I'm not going anywhere." The night passed slowly, with Vaughn periodically checking her fever and re-wetting the compress on her forehead. Twice she stirred, mumbling incoherently about someone named Thomas and begging not to be found. Each time, Vaughn soothed her with soft words and more water until she slipped back into unconsciousness. As dawn broke across the desert, painting the sky in brilliant orange and pink hues, the woman's eyes finally fluttered open. They were a striking blue, like the deepest part of the sky just before dusk, and they widened with fear when they focused on Vaughn's face. "Easy now," he said, keeping his distance to avoid frightening her further. "You're safe. I found you yesterday out here alone." She tried to sit up and immediately gasped in pain, her hand flying to her bandaged side. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Vaughn cautioned. "You've been shot. The bleeding's mostly stopped, but you'll tear it open again if you move too quick." The woman swallowed hard, her eyes darting around their makeshift camp before returning to his face. "Who are you?" she managed, her voice a dry whisper. "Vaughn Keller," he replied, offering his canteen. "Here, drink slowly." She accepted the water with trembling hands. After taking several careful sips, she lowered the canteen and studied him with cautious eyes. "Willow Anderson," she offered in return. "Thank you for not leaving me." "Couldn't very well ride past a dying woman, Miss Anderson," Vaughn said, the ghost of a smile touching his weathered face. "Think you can tell me how you came to be shot and abandoned in one of the most unforgiving stretches of desert in the territory?" Willow's face clouded and her hand unconsciously tightened around the canteen. "I was traveling by stagecoach to Tucson. We were attacked. 3 men. They killed the driver and the guard." Her voice broke, and she closed her eyes against the memory. "They took everything of value from the other passengers and me. Then they forced us back into the coach and drove it off the main road." She paused, drawing a shaky breath. "One of the men, he wanted more than my jewelry. I fought him, and in the struggle his gun went off." Her hand drifted to her wounded side. "They thought I was dead or close enough. They left me behind while they took the others. Somewhere, I don't know what happened to them." Vaughn's jaw tightened in anger, but he kept his voice gentle. "How long ago? 2 days, I think. Maybe 3. I've been walking, trying to find help." Her eyes filled with tears. "I hid during the day and walked at night, but yesterday I became so dizzy." "You're lucky to be alive," Vaughn said bluntly. "Most people wouldn't last half a day out here without water." He studied her face, noting the determination behind the fear in her eyes. "You're tougher than you look, Miss Anderson." A hint of pride flashed across her features. "My father raised me to be resourceful. He always said a woman should know how to survive in a world that wasn't built for her." Vaughn nodded appreciatively. "Wise man. We need to get you to a doctor, but I don't think you can ride yet. I'll need to make a travois to pull behind my horse." "A what?" "A travois. It's like a stretcher, made with branches. The Indians use them to transport their wounded or supplies." He stood, brushing dust from his worn denim pants. "Rest while I gather what we need. We'll head out when the worst of the day's heat passes." As Vaughn moved about the camp, cutting suitable branches from the sparse desert vegetation and lashing them together with strips of leather from his saddlebags, he couldn't help but glance frequently at his unexpected companion. Despite her injured state and disheveled appearance, there was something undeniably captivating about Willow Anderson. It wasn't just her natural beauty, which was considerable even through the dirt and blood. It was the quiet dignity with which she bore her pain, the flash of steel he'd glimpsed beneath her refined exterior. Willow, for her part, watched her rescuer with equal interest. He moved with the easy grace of a man accustomed to hard work and long days in the saddle. His face was tanned and weathered from years under the desert sun, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than his current serious expression indicated. His hair was dark brown, almost black, with a slight curl where it fell just above his collar, and his eyes were a warm amber that reminded her of honey in sunlight. He didn't wear a badge, but there was something about him that spoke of authority, not the kind that came with official position, but rather the natural command of a man who knew his capabilities and limitations with absolute certainty. "Mr. Keller," she called softly as he returned to camp with his completed travois. "May I ask what brings you to this particular stretch of nowhere?" Vaughn's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "I was tracking mustangs. There's a small herd that ranges through here, about a dozen horses, led by a magnificent black stallion I've been trying to catch a glimpse of for months." "You capture wild horses?" she asked, a note of disapproval in her voice. "No, madam," he corrected. "I observe them, draw them sometimes." At her surprised expression, he shrugged self-consciously. "It passes the time. You're an artist." "Hardly that. Just a man who appreciates beautiful things." He busied himself securing the travois to Midnight's saddle. "We should get moving before the sun sets. Nights get cold out here." With gentle efficiency, Vaughn helped Willow onto the travois, making her as comfortable as possible with his bedroll and spare blanket. The movement clearly caused her pain, but she bit her lip and made no sound of complaint. "It's not exactly a carriage ride," Vaughn apologized as he finished securing her, "but it'll get us to Copper Springs. After nearly dying alone in the desert, Mr. Keller, I find I'm not particular about my mode of transportation," Willow replied with unexpected humor. Vaughn chuckled as he mounted Midnight. "Fair enough, Miss Anderson. Let me know if you need to stop." They traveled slowly through the evening and into the night, Vaughn carefully guiding his horse around the worst of the rough terrain to minimize Willow's discomfort. She drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally murmuring in her sleep, but never fully waking. Vaughn stopped every few hours to check her wound and give her water, growing increasingly concerned about the heat radiating from her skin. By dawn, they had made significant progress toward Copper Springs, but Willow's condition had deteriorated. Her breathing was shallow and her skin burned with fever. Vaughn knew the wound was likely infected and the clock was ticking. Pushing Midnight harder than he would have liked, they finally crested a hill to see the small mining town sprawled in the valley below. "Almost there," he told Willow, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "Just hold on a little longer." Copper Springs was a typical frontier town, one main street, lined with false-fronted buildings, a few side streets with smaller establishments and homes, and the looming structures of the copper mine that gave the town its name and reason for existence. Vaughn headed straight for Dr. Howard Benson's small clinic near the center of town, ignoring the curious stares of the townspeople as he passed. Vaughn dismounted quickly and lifted Willow from the travois, cradling her against his chest as he shouldered open the door to the clinic. "Doc Benson," he called out. "I need help here." The elderly doctor emerged from a back room, wiping his hands on a towel. His bushy white eyebrows rose at the sight of the blood-stained woman in Vaughn's arms. "Bring her in here," he directed, leading the way to a small examination room. "What happened?" "Gunshot wound to her side," Vaughn explained, gently laying Willow on the narrow bed. "I found her in the desert yesterday, already injured. She said it happened 2 or 3 days ago during a stagecoach robbery." Dr. Benson's skilled hands were already examining the wound. "She survived this long. Remarkable. The bullet appears to have gone clean through, missing anything vital, but there's significant infection setting in." He looked up at Vaughn with serious eyes. "I'll do what I can, but she's very weak. You should wait outside." Vaughn hesitated, surprisingly reluctant to leave Willow's side. "I promised I wouldn't leave her," he said quietly. The doctor studied him for a moment. "Very well. You can stay, but keep out of my way. And fetch my assistant, Martha, from next door. Tell her to bring my surgical kit." The next hour passed in a blur of activity as Dr. Benson cleaned, debrided, and redressed Willow's wound. The doctor's assistant, a sturdy woman in her 50s, efficiently assisted while Vaughn stood silently in the corner, his hat clutched in his hands. He watched as they worked to bring down Willow's fever with cool compresses and administered laudanum for the pain. "She's young and strong," Dr. Benson finally said, washing his hands in a basin of water. "That's in her favor, but the next 24 hours will be critical. If the fever breaks, she should recover. And if it doesn't," Vaughn asked, his voice rougher than he intended. The doctor gave him a sympathetic look. "Then we've done all we can." He dried his hands and approached Vaughn. "You look dead on your feet, son. When's the last time you slept?" Vaughn shrugged. "I'm fine. There's a boarding house down the street. Mrs. Fuller keeps clean rooms and serves decent meals. Why don't you get some rest? Martha will stay with your friend." "I told you I promised not to leave her," Vaughn repeated stubbornly. Dr. Benson sighed. "At least let me have Martha bring you something to eat. And there's a wash basin in the corner if you want to clean up." After the doctor left, Vaughn pulled a chair next to Willow's bed and settled in for his vigil. Martha brought him a plate of food and a cup of strong coffee, which he accepted gratefully. The hours stretched on as Willow alternately shivered and burned with fever, occasionally calling out in her delirium. Vaughn found himself holding her hand during the worst of it, murmuring reassurances as he had done in the desert. It was well past midnight when Sheriff Thomas Blackwell entered the clinic, his heavy boots announcing his arrival before he appeared in the doorway of the sick room. "Keller," he acknowledged with a nod. "Doc Benson told me you brought in an injured woman, said something about a stagecoach robbery." Vaughn stood, rolling his stiff shoulders. "That's what she told me before the fever took hold. She said the Tucson stage was attacked 3 days ago. Driver and guard killed, passengers robbed." The sheriff frowned. "Haven't heard about any stage being hit, but communications aren't exactly reliable out here." He moved closer to look at Willow. "Any idea who she is?" She said her name is Willow Anderson. "Sounds like she might be from back east, based on her accent and clothes." Sheriff Blackwell's frown deepened. "Anderson? There's something familiar about that name." He shook his head. "I'll send telegrams to Tucson and Phoenix, see what I can find out about any robberies." "And her name might be someone's looking for her." Something in the sheriff's tone made Vaughn uneasy. "She mentioned a man named Thomas when she was delirious, seemed afraid of him finding her." The sheriff's eyes narrowed slightly. "Could be anybody. Thomas is a common enough name." He adjusted his gun belt and headed for the door. "Let me know when she wakes up. I'll need a statement from her." After the sheriff left, Vaughn returned to his chair, pondering the man's reaction. Thomas Blackwell had been sheriff of Copper Springs for nearly 8 years, and while Vaughn hadn't had much direct interaction with him during his infrequent visits to town, something about the man had always struck him as off. Perhaps it was the way the local women tended to cross the street to avoid him, or how his deputies seemed more afraid of him than respectful. Vaughn's musings were interrupted when Willow stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. For a moment, confusion clouded her features before recognition dawned. "Mr. Keller," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm here," he assured her, taking her hand. "We made it to town. You're at the doctor's clinic in Copper Springs." Relief washed over her face. "Thank you." Her eyes began to drift closed again, but then she forced them open with visible effort. "The sheriff, has he been told?" "Yes, he was just here. He's going to send telegrams about the stagecoach robbery." A flash of panic crossed Willow's face. "No, he can't. He can't know I'm here." Her fingers tightened around Vaughn's with surprising strength. "Please, you don't understand." "Willow, you're not making sense," Vaughn said gently, attributing her distress to the fever. "The sheriff needs to investigate what happened to you." "Not him," she insisted, becoming increasingly agitated. Thomas Blackwell is the reason I'm running. He's the reason I was on that stage. Vaughn stared at her in shock. Sheriff Blackwell, you know him. Willow's eyes were wide with fear. He's my brother-in-law, my sister Caroline's husband. He killed her. And now he wants to kill me because I know. Before Vaughn could respond to this startling revelation, Willow's eyes rolled back, and she slipped into unconsciousness once more, leaving him stunned and uncertain. If what she'd said was true, they were in the worst possible place for her recovery, directly under the nose of a murderer with a badge. Dawn found Vaughn still at Willow's bedside, though he'd moved his chair to a position where he could see both her and the door. Doctor. Benson arrived early, looking surprised to find him there. You stayed all night. You're either very devoted or very stubborn, the doctor commented as he checked Willow's temperature. Maybe both, Vaughn admitted. How is she? The doctor's weathered face broke into a smile. Much improved. Her fever's broken and the wound looks cleaner. I think she'll pull through. He straightened up, studying Vaughn with curious eyes. You know, in all the years you've passed through Copper Springs, I don't think I've ever seen you take this much interest in another person. Vaughn shifted uncomfortably. She was alone and hurt. Anyone would have done the same. No, they wouldn't have, Dr. Benson contradicted mildly. Most would have brought her to town and gone on their way, duty done. You haven't left her side. Before Vaughn could formulate a response, the clinic door opened and Sheriff Blackwell strode in, his deputy Lewis trailing behind him. How's our patient this morning, Doc? The sheriff asked, his tone friendly enough, but his eyes cold as they fixed on the woman in the bed. Out of danger, I believe, Dr. Benson replied. But she needs rest, Sheriff. Whatever questions you have will have to wait. Just a few quick ones, Blackwell insisted, moving closer to the bed. I sent those telegrams you mentioned, Keller. Interesting responses. His hand came to rest on his holstered pistol, in what might have appeared a casual gesture to anyone who didn't know to look for the threat in it. No stagecoach robberies reported in the territory this week, and no one matching her description on the passenger lists. Vaughn remained seated, keeping his posture relaxed despite the tension coiling in his muscles. Maybe they haven't found the stage yet. She said it was driven off the main road. Maybe, Blackwell conceded, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. But then there's the matter of her name. Willow Anderson, you said. His smile didn't reach his eyes. That's mighty peculiar, because my late wife's maiden name was Anderson, and she had a sister named Willow. The room went very still. Dr. Benson looked between the two men, clearly sensing the dangerous undercurrent. Your wife had a sister, Vaughn asked innocently. What a coincidence. Isn't it just? Blackwell's hand tightened on his gun. Especially since my wife's sister disappeared from St. Louis 6 months ago, after making some very ugly, very false accusations about me following Caroline's tragic accident. Dr. Benson cleared his throat. Gentlemen, this is a place of healing. Whatever disagreement you have, no disagreement, Doc, Blackwell interrupted, his gaze never leaving Vaughn. Just clarifying some facts. When Miss Anderson wakes up, I'll need to speak with her immediately. Family concern, you understand. After the sheriff and his deputy left, Doctor. Benson turned to Vaughn with worried eyes. What was that about? Vaughn stood, moving to the window to watch the sheriff cross the street toward his office. She woke briefly last night, said Blackwell killed her sister, his wife, and that she's running from him. Good Lord, the doctor breathed. There were rumors when Caroline died last year. Fall down the stairs, they said, but some folks whispered it wasn't an accident. Nothing could be proven, of course. And now the only witness to whatever happened is lying in your clinic, completely vulnerable, Vaughn finished grimly. We need to get her out of Copper Springs. She's not strong enough to travel, Dr. Benson protested. The infection could return, the wound could reopen, she'll be dead for certain if she stays, Vaughn cut in. You saw his eyes. He wasn't even trying to hide it. The doctor ran a hand over his face. This puts me in an impossible position. My duty is to my patient's health. And her life, Vaughn countered. Doc, I'm not asking you to help us escape, just look the other way when we do. After a long moment, Dr. Benson nodded reluctantly. I need to make my morning rounds. I'll be gone for at least 2 hours. Martha won't arrive until noon. He moved to a cabinet and began gathering supplies. She'll need these medications, clean bandages, and as much rest as possible. Thank you, Vaughn said sincerely, accepting the bundle of medical supplies. I'll make sure she's taken care of. Once the doctor had gone, Vaughn gently woke Willow. Her eyes were clearer now, the fever having subsided, though pain and exhaustion still lined her face. We need to leave, he told her without preamble. Blackwell knows who you are. He was just here. Fear flashed across her features, but she nodded, attempting to sit up. I knew he'd find me eventually. I just hoped to be farther away by then. Easy, Vaughn cautioned, helping her to a sitting position. The doc says you're better but still weak. Are you sure you can travel? Willow's jaw set with determination. I don't have a choice. Thomas won't stop until I'm dead or silenced. Then we'll make sure he doesn't find you, Vaughn promised. Can you tell me what happened? With your sister? Willow's eyes filled with tears. Caroline wrote to me for months about Thomas's temper, how he would fly into rages over nothing. I begged her to leave him, to come stay with me in St. Louis, but she was afraid. She swallowed hard. Then last November I received a telegram saying she had fallen down the stairs and died. I came for the funeral and things didn't add up. The bruises on her body weren't consistent with a fall. You confronted him, Vaughn guessed. Willow nodded. I was a fool. I should have gathered evidence first, gone to the territorial governor or someone with authority outside Copper Springs. Instead, I accused him directly. Her voice broke. He nearly killed me that night, said it would look like I'd killed myself out of grief for my sister. I managed to escape barely. I've been running ever since, trying to gather enough evidence and support to bring him to justice. And the stagecoach robbery, was that real? Yes, she confirmed. Though I wonder now if it was truly random. Thomas has connections throughout the territory. He could have arranged it once he discovered I was heading to Tucson. Vaughn's mind raced, considering their options. We need to make it look like you're still too ill to be moved. If Blackwell thinks you're unconscious, it might buy us some time. Working together, they arranged the bedding to appear as if Willow was still lying there, her face obscured by blankets. Vaughn helped her dress in the clean clothes Martha had provided the previous day, a simple calico dress that hung loose on her thin frame. We can't take Midnight from the livery stable, Vaughn explained as he packed the medical supplies. That would be the first place Blackwell would check. We'll have to find another way out of town. The mining supply train, Willow suggested. It leaves for Tucson every Thursday morning at 9. Today's Thursday. Vaughn glanced at the small clock on the doctor's desk. It's just past 7 now. Think you can make it to the station? It's on the other side of town. I'll crawl there if I have to, Willow said fiercely. With Vaughn supporting much of her weight, they slipped out the back door of the clinic into the alley behind. Willow's face was pale with pain, but she didn't complain as they slowly made their way through the back streets of Copper Springs, avoiding the main thoroughfare where they might be spotted by the sheriff or his deputies. The small railway station was already bustling with activity when they arrived. The supply train, just 5 cars long, was being loaded with equipment bound for the larger mining operations near Tucson. Vaughn spotted a cattle car near the rear of the train that appeared to be empty. "Wait here," he told Willow, settling her in the shadow of a stack of crates. "I'll find out if we can buy passage." "We can't risk official tickets," Willow warned. "Thomas will check passenger manifests." Vaughn nodded grimly. "I wasn't planning on asking the station master." He approached a weathered-looking brakeman who was inspecting the wheels of the cattle car. After a brief, hushed conversation and the exchange of several coins from Vaughn's meager funds, the man nodded toward the far end of the platform. "He'll let us ride in the cattle car," Vaughn explained when he returned to Willow. "It's not comfortable, but it's better than staying here." At this point, Mr. Keller, "A cattle car sounds like luxury accommodations," Willow replied with a wan smile. They waited anxiously as the minutes ticked by, both acutely aware that Sheriff Blackwell could discover their absence at any moment. Finally, the brakeman gave them a subtle signal, and Vaughn helped Willow to the rear of the train, where the man quickly ushered them into the empty cattle car. "Stay quiet," the brakeman warned. "Conductor does a walk-through before we leave. After that, you should be fine until we reach Tucson." The cattle car smelled of hay and manure, but Vaughn quickly arranged a relatively clean corner for Willow to rest in, using his jacket to cushion her from the hard wooden floor. "I'm sorry I've dragged you into this," Willow said softly as they settled in to wait. "You've already done more than anyone could expect, saving my life in the desert. Now you're a fugitive too." Vaughn shrugged. "I was never one for putting down roots anyway, and I don't much like men who hurt women and abuse their power. Still, your life would be simpler if you just left me at the clinic. Simpler, maybe, but I wouldn't have been able to live with myself." He met her eyes steadily. "I told you I wouldn't leave you, Miss Anderson. I meant it." Before Willow could respond, they heard voices approaching the conductor doing his final check. They froze, barely breathing, as footsteps paused outside their car. The door slid open a few inches, and a face peered in briefly before the door closed again. The footsteps continued on, and a few minutes later the train whistle blew. With a jerk and the hiss of steam, the train began to move. Vaughn felt the tension in his shoulders ease slightly as they pulled away from the station. "We made it," Willow breathed, relief evident in her voice. "Out of town, at least," Vaughn cautioned. "But Blackwell won't give up easily. Once he discovers you're gone, he'll guess we took the train." "Then we don't go all the way to Tucson," Willow decided. "We get off somewhere before, somewhere unexpected." Vaughn nodded appreciatively. "Smart thinking. There's a water stop about halfway near a place called Diablo Canyon. Not much there except a trading post and a few scattered homesteads, but we could get supplies and maybe horses." As the train picked up speed, rattling and swaying along the tracks, Willow leaned back against the wall of the car, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. Vaughn checked her bandages, relieved to find no fresh bleeding despite their hasty escape. "You should rest while you can," he advised. "It's a 4-hour journey to the water stop." Willow didn't argue, her eyes already drifting closed. "Wake me if anything happens." "I will," he promised, settling himself near the door where he could keep watch through the cracks between the boards. As Willow slept, Vaughn found himself studying her face, softer now in repose. She was unlike any woman he had encountered in his travels, refined yet resilient, frightened yet brave. Her determination to bring her brother-in-law to justice, even at great personal risk, spoke of a strength of character that impressed him deeply. He had spent the years since the war avoiding entanglements, human or geographical. The horrors he had witnessed as a young soldier had left him wary of forming connections that could lead to more pain. Yet somehow, in the span of just 2 days, this woman had slipped past defenses he thought impenetrable. The train journey passed uneventfully, the rhythmic clacking of wheels on rails occasionally lulling Vaughn into a light doze from which he would jerk awake, immediately checking for any signs of danger. The brakeman appeared once, bringing them a canteen of water and some bread wrapped in a cloth. "Heard some commotion back at the station just as we were pulling out," the man informed them in a low voice. "Sheriff and a deputy asking questions about the passengers." Vaughn's muscles tensed. "Did they search the train?" "Nah, not enough time before we left. But I reckon they'll wire ahead to Tucson." The brakeman scratched his stubbled chin thoughtfully. "You folks might want to consider getting off at the water stop. I can slow the train down more than usual, make it easier for you." "We'd be much obliged," Vaughn said sincerely, pressing another coin into the man's palm. The brakeman pocketed it with a nod. "About an hour till we reach it. I'll come warn you before." When he had gone, Vaughn gently woke Willow, who had slept through the exchange. Her color looked better after the rest, though pain still tightened the corners of her mouth. "We'll be reaching the water stop soon," he explained, offering her some bread and water. "The brakeman says Blackwell was at the station. He'll likely have men waiting in Tucson." Willow accepted the food with a grimace. "I should have known he wouldn't waste any time." She ate slowly, clearly building her strength for what lay ahead. "What's our plan once we leave the train?" The trading post at Diablo Canyon is run by a man named Ezra Jenkins. "I've done business with him before, sold him furs and such. He's a fair man, keeps to himself. Might be willing to sell us horses without asking too many questions." "And then," Willow pressed, "where do we go from there?" Vaughn hesitated, realizing he hadn't thought beyond immediate escape. "I have a cabin," he finally said. "Up in the Dragoon Mountains, about 2 days' ride from the canyon. It's isolated. I use it when I'm trapping in winter. No one knows about it except me." "You take me there?" Willow asked, surprise evident in her voice. "It's the safest place I can think of," Vaughn replied simply. "Somewhere you can heal properly before we figure out our next move." Willow studied him for a long moment. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Keller? You've already saved my life once." "You could have left me at the clinic and continued on your way with a clear conscience." Vaughn met her gaze steadily. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because—" He paused, searching for words to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. "Because when I found you in that desert, something changed. I can't explain it better than that." A faint blush colored Willow's cheeks and she looked away. "I'm grateful, regardless of your reasons." Before Vaughn could respond, the train began to slow and the brakeman reappeared at the door. "Water stop's coming up," he announced. "I'll slow her down as much as I can around the bend just past the station. There's a patch of scrub pine that'll give you some cover. Good luck to you both." The train continued to decelerate. As it approached the small water station, little more than a water tower, and a tiny depot building beside the tracks. As promised, after they passed these structures, the train slowed even further around a gentle curve where a stand of stunted pine trees grew close to the tracks. "Now," Vaughn said, sliding the door open just enough for them to slip through. He jumped first, landing with practiced ease despite the train's movement, then turned to help Willow. She hesitated only briefly before allowing him to lift her down. The impact of landing sent pain shooting through her injured side, and she bit back a cry, sagging against Vaughn's solid frame. "I've got you," he murmured, supporting her as they quickly moved into the shelter of the trees. Behind them, the train was already picking up speed again, continuing its journey toward Tucson. They rested briefly in the pine thicket, giving Willow a chance to recover from the jump. The trading post was visible in the distance, a low adobe building with a wooden porch, surrounded by a few outbuildings and corrals. A thin spiral of smoke rose from its chimney against the clear blue sky. How likely is it that Blackwell could have telegraphed ahead to here? Willow asked, her eyes scanning the quiet landscape. Not very, Vaughn replied. There's no telegraph office at Diablo Canyon. Ezra rides to Tucson once a month to collect messages and mail. He helped her to her feet. Still, we should be careful. Stay close to me and let me do the talking. The walk to the trading post took longer than expected, with Willow needing to rest frequently. By the time they reached the dusty yard in front of the building, the sun was high overhead, beating down mercilessly. Ezra Jenkins proved to be, as Vaughn remembered, a tall, gaunt man with a shock of white hair and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. He greeted Vaughn with recognition, if not warmth, and eyed Willow with undisguised curiosity. Keller. Been what, 2 years? Ezra's gaze flickered to Willow, noting her pale complexion and the way she leaned on Vaughn for support. Your lady friend looks like she could use a seat and some water. Much obliged, Ezra, Vaughn replied, carefully guiding Willow to a bench on the porch. We've had a rough journey. Inside the dim coolness of the trading post, Vaughn quietly explained their need for supplies and transportation while Willow rested outside. He was deliberately vague about their circumstances, but Ezra was no fool. Running from someone, I take it, the older man commented as he gathered the items Vaughn requested. Not my business why, but you should know the sheriff from Copper Springs sent riders out this way yesterday, looking for a woman matching your friend's description. Vaughn's hand instinctively moved toward his holster. Yesterday, before we even escaped, Ezra nodded, his expression grim. Seems like he suspected she might try to run, said she was wanted for theft and her own sister's murder. That's a lie, Vaughn growled. Blackwell's the murderer. She's his witness. The trader shrugged. Like I said, not my business, but his men stayed at the canyon overnight, left this morning heading west toward the old Spanish mission ruins. Away from here, then, Vaughn said, relief evident in his voice. For now, Ezra agreed. But they'll circle back once they realize they're on the wrong trail. He finished wrapping their supplies in oilcloth and pushed the bundle across the counter. I can sell you 2 horses, not my best, but sturdy enough. And there's an old line shack about 15 miles northeast of here, in the foothills. Might be a good place to lie low for a day or two before you head for your cabin in the Dragoons. Vaughn looked at the older man in surprise. How did you know about my cabin? Ezra's weathered face creased in a rare smile. You think trappers don't talk? Jeb Wilson mentioned it last winter, said you had quite a setup up there. At Vaughn's concerned expression, he added, Don't worry. Not many know its exact location, and those who do aren't the type to share information with lawmen. An hour later, Vaughn and Willow were mounted on their newly acquired horses, a sturdy buckskin gelding for Vaughn and a gentle roan mare for Willow, heading northeast toward the foothills. Their saddlebags were packed with enough supplies to last several days, including medical items Ezra had added at no extra charge after seeing Willow's condition. The line shack proved to be exactly as Ezra had described, a simple one-room structure built of logs and stone, weathered by years of exposure but still solid. It contained a small iron stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a narrow cot pushed against one wall. Windows on either side allowed for cross-ventilation and, more importantly, visibility in all directions. It's not much, Vaughn apologized as he helped Willow inside, but it's secure and out of sight. After a cattle car in the open desert, it looks like paradise, Willow replied with a tired smile. She sank onto the cot with a sigh of relief, the long ride having taxed her limited strength. Vaughn busied himself building a small fire in the stove, carefully controlling the smoke to minimize the chance of it being spotted. As the tiny cabin warmed, he unpacked their supplies and changed Willow's bandages, pleased to see the wound continue to heal without signs of fresh infection. "We should stay here tomorrow, give you more time to rest," he suggested as he prepared a simple meal of beans, jerky, and coffee. "Then we can make for the Dragoons the following morning." Willow nodded, accepting the tin plate he offered her. "Do you think we've lost him? Blackwell, I mean." "For now," Vaughn said cautiously. "But he's not the type to give up easily, especially if he fears you can testify against him." He settled into one of the chairs, balancing his own plate on his knee. "You mentioned gathering evidence. What exactly were you hoping to find in Tucson?" Willow set down her fork, her expression turning serious. "There's a lawyer there named James Harrington. He was a friend of my father's and has connections in territorial government. I was hoping he could help me petition for an official investigation into Caroline's death." She hesitated, then continued. "I also have this." From a hidden pocket sewn into her dress, she withdrew a small packet wrapped in oilcloth. Inside was a folded piece of paper, which she carefully smoothed out on the table. It was a letter, written in a delicate feminine hand. "Caroline wrote this to me 3 days before she died," Willow explained. "She was finally planning to leave Thomas. She mentioned specific incidents of abuse, threats he made against her life. Most importantly, she writes about a ledger he keeps hidden in his office, evidence of bribes he's taken, criminals he's protected." Vaughn scanned the letter, his jaw tightening as he read Caroline's desperate words. "This is damning, but it's not enough on its own. It's your word and a letter that could have been written any time." "I know," Willow admitted. "That's why I need to get to someone with authority, someone outside Blackwell's sphere of influence. Even with this lawyer's help, it would be your word against a sheriff's," Vaughn cautioned. "The territorial governor would be reluctant to act without more substantial evidence." Willow's shoulders slumped slightly. "Then what do? I can't run forever, and I can't let him get away with murdering Caroline." Vaughn was quiet for a long moment, considering options. "What if we got the ledger?" Willow stared at him in disbelief. "Go back to Copper Springs, into Thomas's office. That would be suicide." "Not necessarily," Vaughn replied, warming to the idea. "I've done my share of hunting, tracking, moving silently, staying hidden. If the ledger exists where your sister said it does, I could get in and out without being seen." "No," Willow said firmly. "I won't let you risk your life like that. You've already done too much for me." "What's the alternative? Keep running until Blackwell eventually finds us. Or until you're forced to live under an assumed name in some distant city, always looking over your shoulder." Vaughn leaned forward, his eyes intent on hers. "This may be our only chance to stop him for good." Their gazes held for a long moment, a silent battle of wills. Finally, Willow looked away, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. If we were to consider this insane plan," she said slowly, "we would need to be absolutely certain where the ledger is kept. Caroline's letter mentions a hidden compartment in his desk, but that was months ago. He could have moved it since then." Vaughn nodded thoughtfully. "Is there anyone in Copper Springs who might know? Someone who worked closely with Blackwell but could be trusted?" Willow considered this, then shook her head. "His deputies are loyal to him or too afraid to cross him. But—" Her eyes lit up with sudden realization. "There's Mrs. Abernathy, the widow who cleans the sheriff's office and jail. She was kind to Caroline, brought her remedies for bruises that she claimed were from accidents. If anyone would help us, it might be her." "How would we contact her without alerting Blackwell?" "She lives on the edge of town, in a small house behind the church," Willow explained. "If we could somehow get a message to her." They spent the remainder of the evening developing a plan risky and dependent on many variables beyond their control, but a plan nonetheless. As night fell, the tiny cabin grew cold despite the stove, and Vaughn insisted Willow take the cot while he made do with his bedroll on the floor. "We should reach my cabin by nightfall tomorrow if we leave at first light," Vaughn said as he banked the fire for the night. "It's more comfortable than this place and better hidden. We can finalize our plans there." Willow nodded, pulling the thin blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Vaughn," she said softly, using his first name for the first time. "Thank you, not just for saving me but for believing me. Not many would take the word of a strange woman over a respected lawman." Vaughn looked up at her, his expression serious in the dim light. "I've learned to trust my instincts about people. They told me you were worth saving in that desert, and nothing since has changed that judgment." A comfortable silence fell between them, filled with unspoken thoughts and feelings neither was ready to acknowledge. Eventually, Willow's breathing deepened as she drifted into sleep, while Vaughn remained awake, keeping watch and contemplating the dangerous path that lay ahead. The journey to Vaughn's cabin in the Dragoon Mountains took longer than expected. Willow's strength, though improving, was still limited, and they were forced to travel at a slower pace than Vaughn would have preferred. They avoided main trails and kept to higher ground where possible, always watchful for signs of pursuit. By the time they sighted the cabin, a sturdy structure of logs and stone nestled against a rocky outcropping halfway up the mountainside. The sun was already sinking toward the horizon. Tall pines surrounded it on three sides, providing natural concealment, while the elevation offered a clear view of the approaches from the valley below. "It's perfect," Willow breathed as they dismounted in the small clearing before the cabin. "How did you find this place?" "Stumbled upon it about 3 years ago," Vaughn explained, unlocking the heavy wooden door. "It was abandoned, probably built by prospectors during the Silver Rush. I fixed it up, added to it bit by bit each season." There was a note of pride in his voice as he swung the door open. "It's not much, but it's home when I need one." The interior was simple but surprisingly comfortable. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall with a cooking area nearby. A table and chairs sat in the center of the main room, while a curtained alcove at the back presumably contained a bed. Shelves lined the walls, holding books, tools, and supplies. Everything was neat and organized, reflecting Vaughn's methodical nature. "It's wonderful," Willow said sincerely, taking in the cozy space. "I never would have expected a self-proclaimed wanderer to create such a welcoming home." Vaughn seemed almost embarrassed by her praise. Even wanderers need somewhere to return to occasionally. He busied himself lighting the fire and lamps as twilight deepened outside. "You take the bed, I'll sleep out here." Despite her protests that she had already imposed enough, Willow eventually acquiesced, too exhausted to argue further. The bed proved to be surprisingly comfortable, with a proper mattress stuffed with pine needles and soft furs for warmth. She fell asleep almost immediately, lulled by the sense of security the cabin provided. The next few days established a routine of sorts. Vaughn hunted and checked his traps, bringing back rabbits and occasionally a grouse for their meals. Willow's strength gradually returned as she rested and ate properly, and she began to help with cooking and other light tasks around the cabin. Each evening, they refined their plan to obtain Blackwell's ledger, debating approaches and contingencies. "Mrs. Abernathy cleans the jail on Tuesday evenings," Willow explained as they sat by the fire on their 4th night at the cabin. "That would be our best opportunity to get a message to her without Blackwell or his deputies knowing. And if she agrees to help, she could tell us exactly where the ledger is now and when the office is likely to be empty." Vaughn added, stoking the fire. But first, I need to get into town unrecognized to make contact with her. Your beard helps, Willow observed, noting how his appearance had changed in the week since their escape. The dark stubble that had shadowed his jaw when he found her in the desert had grown into a short beard that altered his features significantly. Not enough. Blackwell's had plenty of time to describe me to everyone in town. Vaughn ran a hand through his hair thoughtfully. I could pose as a drifter or prospector they pass through Copper Springs often enough. Or a cattle drover, Willow suggested. Several of the ranches outside town ship their cattle this time of year. They continued planning late into the night, weighing risks against necessity. Throughout these discussions, Vaughn noticed Willow becoming more animated, her natural intelligence and determination shining through as her physical condition improved. She was no longer the half-dead woman he had found in the desert, nor the frightened fugitive of their escape. In her place was a formidable ally with courage and conviction that matched his own. For her part, Willow found herself increasingly drawn to the quiet strength and integrity that defined Vaughn Keller. He was unlike any man she had known in St. Louis society, direct, unpretentious, guided by a clear moral compass rather than social conventions. His capability in this harsh environment both impressed and reassured her, and she began to understand why she had trusted him instinctively from their first meeting. On the morning of the 5th day, Vaughn announced he would ride to a small settlement about 10 miles away to gather information about conditions in Copper Springs without risking being recognized. "I'll be back by nightfall," he promised as he saddled his horse. "Keep the door barred and use this if necessary." He handed her his spare revolver, showing her how to load and fire it. "Be careful," Willow urged, suddenly anxious about his departure. The past days of companionship had created a bond between them that made separation, even briefly, unexpectedly difficult. "Always am," he replied with one of his rare smiles, touching the brim of his hat before mounting and riding away. Alone for the first time since her rescue, Willow busied herself with tasks around the cabin, trying to ignore the hollow feeling Vaughn's absence created. She swept the plank floors, organized their supplies, and even attempted to bake bread using the simple ingredients available. The domestic activities were soothing, reminding her of happier times before tragedy had upended her life. As promised, Vaughn returned just as dusk was gathering, bringing news that shifted their plans dramatically. "Blackwell's called in favors with every sheriff in the territory," he reported grimly as they sat at the table sharing a simple supper. "There are wanted posters for both of us now, you for murder and theft, me for aiding a fugitive. The reward's substantial." Willow paled. "Murder. He's accusing me of Caroline's death and stealing family heirlooms," Vaughn confirmed. "According to the story he's spreading, you came to Copper Springs after your sister's accident, became unhinged with grief, and blamed him. When he refused to give you Caroline's jewelry, you stole it and ran." "That's absurd. I would never." Willow stopped, taking a deep breath to calm herself. "What does this mean for our plan?" Vaughn leaned forward, his expression serious. "It means we need to move faster. Every day more people are looking for us. I heard at the settlement that Blackwell himself has been leading search parties in the mountains." "He's getting desperate," Willow observed. "If he's leaving town to search personally, he must be truly afraid of what I know. Or what we might find in that ledger," Vaughn added. "The good news is that his absence creates an opportunity. If he's out searching, his office will be less guarded." "When do we go?" Willow asked, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. "Tomorrow," Vaughn decided. "I'll ride into town as we planned, if I can make contact with Mrs. Abernathy and confirm the ledger's location. I'll try to retrieve it immediately while Blackwell is away. And I stay here, Willow stated, clearly unhappy with this part of the plan. Vaughn reached across the table to cover her hand with his. You're still healing, and you're the one he's most desperate to find. Besides, someone needs to be here if I have to leave town quickly. Though she wanted to argue, Willow recognized the logic in his reasoning. Promise me you'll be careful. Thomas is cunning, and he has the law on his side, or at least the appearance of it. I promise, Vaughn said solemnly, his hand still covering hers. A charged moment passed between them, something unspoken but increasingly undeniable humming in the air. Slowly, almost hesitantly, Vaughn's thumb traced a gentle arc across her knuckles. Willow, I don't, she interrupted softly. Not yet. Not until we're both safe and this is over. I couldn't bear to. She didn't finish the thought, but the implication was clear. She couldn't bear to acknowledge what was growing between them only to lose him to Blackwell's vengeance. Vaughn nodded, understanding in his eyes as he withdrew his hand. When this is over, he agreed. We'll talk then. They spent the remainder of the evening making final preparations. Vaughn altered his appearance as much as possible, darkening his hair with boot polish and affecting a slight limp to change his distinctive gait. They prepared the cabin for a potential hasty departure, packing essential supplies and planning escape routes. Morning came too quickly, bringing with it a tense breakfast and final review of their plan. As Vaughn prepared to leave, Willow surprised him by stepping close and straightening the worn collar of the unfamiliar shirt he wore as part of his disguise. For luck, she whispered, and before he could respond, she rose on tiptoe to press a swift, soft kiss to his cheek. Vaughn's hand came up to touch the spot as if to preserve the sensation. With a nod that conveyed more than words could, he mounted his horse and rode down the mountain trail toward Copper Springs and the dangerous task that awaited. The town appeared unchanged as Vaughn approached from the east, taking the cattle trail rather than the main road. He had rolled in dust before entering, further disguising his appearance, and adopted the slouched posture of a man worn down by hard travel. His horse, similarly dusty and tired-looking, completed the image of a drifter down on his luck. Keeping his hat pulled low, Vaughn made his way to the small church on the edge of town. As Willow had described, a modest house stood behind it, smoke curling from its chimney despite the warmth of the day. He knocked on the door, his free hand resting near his concealed pistol. The woman who answered matched Willow's description of Mrs. Abernathy, a small, round figure with gray hair pulled into a severe bun and kind eyes that had seen much suffering. Those eyes narrowed suspiciously as she took in the dusty stranger on her doorstep. Mrs. Abernathy, my name's Smith, Vaughn began, using the alias they had agreed upon. I'm a friend of Willow Anderson. I believe you knew her sister, Caroline. The woman's expression remained guarded, but she opened the door wider. You'd better come inside, Mr. Smith. Quickly now. Once inside the neat, sparsely furnished home, Mrs. Abernathy studied him more carefully. You're the man who helped Miss Anderson escape, she stated rather than asked. The one Sheriff Blackwell is hunting alongside her. Vaughn tensed, his hand moving imperceptibly toward his weapon. Oh, put your mind at ease, the older woman said with a dismissive wave. I've no love for Thomas Blackwell. What he did to that poor girl Caroline was shameful, and the way this town looked the other way even more so. She gestured to a chair. Sit. Tell me why you're here risking your neck. Vaughn explained their plan as concisely as possible. Mrs. Abernathy listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly thoughtful. The ledger exists, she confirmed when he had finished. I've seen him writing in it late at night when he thinks no one is watching. And yes, it's still in the false bottom of the right drawer in his desk. I saw him replace it there just last week. Will you help us? Vaughn asked directly. The older woman considered for a long moment. Caroline was like a daughter to me. I failed her by not doing more when she was alive. I won't fail her sister. She stood, moving to a sideboard where she withdrew a key from beneath a doily. This opens the back door of the jail. I clean there Tuesday evenings, as Miss Anderson likely told you. Blackwell and his main deputy, Lewis, are out searching the eastern foothills today. Only young Deputy Clark remains in town, and he usually takes his supper at the hotel around 6. Vaughn accepted the key with profound gratitude. We can never repay you for this risk you're taking. Mrs. Abernathy's eyes grew sad. Just make sure Blackwell pays for what he did. That will be payment enough. With the key secured and information about the sheriff's whereabouts confirmed, Vaughn spent the remainder of the day establishing his cover as a drifter, drinking watered-down whiskey at the saloon and listening to local gossip. The town buzzed with talk of the manhunt for Willow and her mysterious accomplice, with embellishments growing wilder with each retelling. By evening, he had learned that Blackwell was indeed searching the eastern mountains and not expected back until the following day. As 6 o'clock approached, Vaughn positioned himself in the alley behind the jail, watching as the young deputy locked the front door and headed toward the hotel, as Mrs. Abernathy had predicted. Once the street was clear, Vaughn slipped to the back door of the jail and inserted the key, holding his breath as the lock turned with a soft click. The jail was silent and dimly lit by the fading daylight through barred windows. Vaughn moved carefully through the corridor past empty cells to the sheriff's office at the front. The desk stood against the far wall, exactly as Willow had described it from her previous visit to confront Blackwell. Working quickly, Vaughn located the false bottom in the right drawer. Inside lay a leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with neat columns of names, dates, and amounts. Flipping through it rapidly, he confirmed it contained exactly the kind of evidence they needed: records of bribes from known criminals, payments to witnesses to change testimony, and even what appeared to be a list of accidents arranged for those who crossed the sheriff. Caroline's name appeared on the final page, along with the date of her death and a cryptic notation. Problem solved. WA next if necessary. Vaughn's blood ran cold at the casual documentation of murder and the clear threat against Willow. Tucking the ledger inside his shirt, he closed the drawer and prepared to leave the way he had come. The sound of voices outside the front door froze him in place. Through the window, he could see Deputy Clark returning, accompanied by Sheriff Blackwell himself, who should have been miles away searching the eastern hills. Trapped, Vaughn quickly assessed his options. The front door was beginning to open. With no time to reach the back exit, he ducked into the shadow of a cell just as the two men entered, their conversation becoming clear. "Waste of time," Blackwell was saying irritably. "Those miners hadn't seen anyone matching their description. I should have known better than to trust Jenkins at the trading post." "At least we eliminated that area, Sheriff," the young deputy replied. "The territorial marshal should arrive tomorrow to help expand the search." Blackwell grunted in acknowledgement, moving toward his office. Vaughn pressed deeper into the shadows, his hand on his pistol. If Blackwell discovered the ledger missing, the alarm would be raised immediately. "I need to check something," the sheriff said. "Wait here." Vaughn's muscles tensed as Blackwell entered his office. Seconds stretched like hours as he waited for the inevitable shout of discovery. Instead, after a brief rustling of papers, Blackwell emerged with a map in his hand. "I'm going to the hotel for a proper meal," he announced. Keep an eye on things here. I want hourly patrols tonight. If Anderson or Keller are foolish enough to return to town, I want to know immediately." "Yes, sir," Deputy Clark responded, settling into a chair by the front desk as Blackwell departed. Vaughn remained motionless in the shadows, weighing his options. The deputy's presence complicated his escape through either door. As he considered creating a diversion, fate intervened in the form of a commotion on the street outside, the sound of breaking glass and raised voices. "What the hell?" the deputy muttered, rising to investigate. He hesitated at the door, clearly torn between his duty to guard the jail and his curiosity about the disturbance. The decision was made for him when someone shouted his name from the street. "Clark, need your help out here. Fight at the saloon." The young deputy grabbed his hat. "Coming," he called, hurrying out and locking the door behind him. Seizing the opportunity, Vaughn moved swiftly through the now empty building to the back door. Within moments, he was in the alley and making his way toward the livery stable where he had left his horse, the precious ledger secure against his chest. The town was in an uproar, with most attention focused on whatever disturbance had broken out at the saloon. Vaughn kept to the shadows, avoiding notice as he reached the stable and quickly saddled his horse. Leading the animal out the back way, he mounted and rode casually toward the eastern edge of town, only urging the horse to greater speed once the buildings of Copper Springs were well behind him. Instead of taking the direct route back to the cabin, Vaughn made a wide circle, doubling back and crossing his own trail several times to confuse any potential pursuers. It was well past midnight when he finally approached the cabin, giving the owl call signal he and Willow had agreed upon to prevent her from shooting him as he approached in the darkness. The door opened immediately, revealing Willow with the spare revolver held ready. The relief on her face when she recognized him was palpable. "You're back," she breathed, lowering the weapon as he entered and secured the door behind him. "Did you find it?" In answer, Vaughn withdrew the ledger from inside his shirt and placed it on the table. "It's all here, Willow. Everything your sister mentioned and more." Blackwell documented all of it: bribes, arranged accidents, even Caroline's murder. His voice softened, "and his intention to silence you if necessary." Willow sank into a chair, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened the ledger and began to read. Vaughn built up the fire and prepared coffee, giving her time to absorb the damning evidence. "He wrote it all down," she finally said, looking up with a mixture of horror and vindication in her eyes. "Every corrupt act, every crime. Why would he keep such incriminating evidence?" "Men like Blackwell often believe they are untouchable," Vaughn replied, setting a cup of coffee before her. "The ledger was probably his way of keeping track of who owed him and what he was owed. I doubt he ever imagined it would fall into anyone else's hands. What do we do now?" Willow asked, closing the book as if its contents were too painful to view longer. "We can't simply walk into the territorial governor's office with this." "No," Vaughn agreed, joining her at the table. "But Mrs. Abernathy mentioned that a territorial marshal is arriving in Copper Springs tomorrow." Marshals answer directly to federal authorities, not local ones. Hope flickered in Willow's eyes. "If we could get this to him before Blackwell realizes it's missing." "Exactly, but it's too risky for either of us to return to town." Vaughn took a thoughtful sip of his coffee. "Mrs. Abernathy, however, might be willing to act as our intermediary." They spent the remainder of the night crafting a detailed letter to accompany the ledger, explaining the circumstances of Caroline's death and Blackwell's subsequent actions against Willow. By dawn, they had a plan. Vaughn would ride back to the settlement he had visited earlier, where he would find a trustworthy messenger to deliver both the ledger and letter to Mrs. Abernathy, who would then pass them to the territorial marshal upon his arrival. "It's still dangerous," Willow pointed out as Vaughn prepared to leave once more. "If Blackwell discovers the ledger is missing before the marshal sees it, then we'll be ready to run," Vaughn said simply. "I've cached supplies at various points in these mountains over the years. We could disappear for months if necessary." The unspoken question hung between them. What came after? If their plan succeeded and Blackwell was brought to justice, what then? Willow would be free to return to her life in St. Louis, while Vaughn would continue his solitary existence in the wilderness, as he had before finding her in the desert. Neither voiced these thoughts as Vaughn departed with the ledger and letter securely hidden in his saddlebags. The day stretched endlessly for Willow as she waited, alternating between hope and dread with each passing hour. To occupy herself, she cleaned the cabin thoroughly, repacked their essential belongings in case a swift departure became necessary, and finally sat by the window, watching the trail for Vaughn's return. It was late afternoon when she spotted movement on the path below, not Vaughn's familiar figure, but 3 riders approaching cautiously, their rifles drawn. With a surge of fear, Willow recognized the lead rider as Sheriff Blackwell, his deputy close behind, followed by a third man she didn't know. They had been found. Heart racing, Willow grabbed the revolver Vaughn had left her and the small pack of supplies she had prepared. There was no time to leave a message for Vaughn. She could only hope he would realize what had happened when he returned to find her gone. Moving silently, she slipped out the back window of the cabin and into the dense pines beyond, just as the riders reached the clearing in front. "Search the place," she heard Blackwell command. "She's here somewhere. The marshal and I will check the perimeter." "Marshal." Willow froze behind a large pine trunk. Was the third man the territorial marshal they had pinned their hopes on? If so, why was he working with Blackwell rather than arresting him? Staying low, Willow worked her way up the rocky slope behind the cabin, using the trees and undergrowth for cover. She needed height and distance to assess the situation and plan her next move. The steep terrain was challenging in her still weakened state, but fear and determination drove her forward. From her elevated position, she could see the men searching the cabin and immediate surroundings. The unknown man, presumably the marshal, separated from Blackwell, moving toward the eastern edge of the clearing where the trail continued around the mountainside. Something about his methodical movement struck Willow as odd. He seemed to be searching for signs of recent passage rather than for her directly. A twig snapped behind her, and Willow whirled, raising the revolver with trembling hands. "Easy," Vaughn whispered, emerging from the trees with his hands slightly raised. "It's just me." Relief flooded through her. "How did you—" "I saw them on the trail and circled around," he explained in hushed tones, crouching beside her. "Did they see you leave?" "No, I don't think so." "Vaughn, one of them might be the marshal we were hoping to contact." Vaughn nodded grimly. "That's Marshal Davis. I recognized him as I was approaching. The question is whether Blackwell has already poisoned his mind against us, or if there's still a chance to reach him." Below, they could hear Blackwell growing increasingly frustrated as the search of the cabin yielded no sign of Willow. "She was here," he insisted to his deputy. "The fire's still warm and there's food prepared. Fan out and keep searching. She can't have gone far." The marshal rejoined them, holstering his weapon. "Sheriff, I'd like a word. In private." Something in the marshal's tone caused Blackwell to tense visibly. Nevertheless, he nodded, directing his deputy to continue the search while he and the marshal stepped inside the cabin. "This might be our chance," Vaughn murmured, studying the scene below. "If I can get to the marshal alone." "It's too dangerous," Willow protested. Blackwell won't hesitate to shoot you on sight. We don't have many options, Vaughn pointed out. And every minute we wait gives them more time to find our trail. Before Willow could respond, raised voices erupted from within the cabin. Though they couldn't make out the words, the tone was unmistakably confrontational. Moments later, the cabin door burst open and Blackwell emerged, his face contorted with rage, followed by the marshal, who now had his pistol drawn and pointed at the sheriff's back. "Deputy Clark," the marshal called. "Front and center now." The young deputy hurried from the trees, confusion evident on his face. "Marshal, what's going on?" "Sheriff Blackwell is under arrest for the murder of Caroline Blackwell, attempted murder of Willow Anderson, corruption, bribery, and a list of other charges long enough to hang him 10 times over," the marshal announced, his voice carrying clearly in the mountain air. "I'm relieving him of his duties effective immediately. Hand over your weapon, Blackwell." For a tense moment, it seemed the sheriff might resist. His hand hovered near his holster as his gaze darted between the marshal and his deputy, calculating odds. "Don't do it, Thomas," the marshal warned, his pistol steady. "I've got sworn statements from Mrs. Abernathy and several others, plus your own ledger detailing every crime. It's over." At the mention of the ledger, Blackwell's face drained of color. "That's impossible. The ledger is in my desk." "Was in your desk," the marshal corrected, "until Mrs. Abernathy delivered it to me this morning, along with a very interesting letter from your sister-in-law." With a roar of fury, Blackwell drew his weapon, but the marshal was faster. A single shot rang out and Blackwell staggered backward, his pistol falling unfired from his hand as he clutched his shoulder. "Foolish choice," the marshal remarked, approaching to kick the fallen weapon away. "Deputy, secure the prisoner. He needs medical attention before his trial, but make no mistake, he will face justice for what he's done." Vaughn and Willow watched in stunned silence as the young deputy, looking shell-shocked but determined, handcuffed his former superior and helped him onto his horse. The marshal surveyed the surrounding forest, then called out in a clear voice, "Miss Anderson, Mr. Keller, if you're within earshot, you can come out now. You're no longer fugitives. In fact, the territorial governor will want to thank you personally for exposing this corruption." Vaughn and Willow exchanged a look of cautious hope. "Do we trust him?" Willow whispered. "Mrs. Abernathy clearly did," Vaughn replied. "And he just shot Blackwell rather than us. I'm inclined to believe he's genuine." Slowly, they made their way down the slope, Vaughn slightly ahead with his hand near his holster, ready to protect Willow if necessary. The marshal spotted them as they emerged from the tree line and lowered his weapon, raising his free hand in greeting. "Miss Anderson, I'm Marshal James Davis. I believe you've been trying to reach me." "Yes," Willow confirmed, stepping forward, "though I didn't expect you to find us here." "Thank Mrs. Abernathy for that," the marshal explained. "She contacted me directly when she heard I was coming to Copper Springs, told me everything. When I received your ledger and letter this morning, I knew I needed to act quickly." He glanced at the sullen, bleeding Blackwell. "Unfortunately, the sheriff overheard my arrival was imminent and insisted on joining the search party. Led us straight here, though I suspect he intended a very different outcome. He meant to kill me," Willow stated with quiet certainty, "just as he killed Caroline." "Yes," the marshal agreed soberly. "The evidence in that ledger, combined with statements I've gathered from townspeople too afraid to speak up until now, is overwhelming. He'll hang for what he's done." Relief washed over Willow in a dizzying wave. After months of fear and running, of pain and uncertainty, justice for her sister was finally within reach. She swayed slightly, and Vaughn's arm came around her waist, supporting her. She's still recovering from a gunshot wound, he explained to the marshal. She needs rest. Marshal Davis nodded, understanding. We'll ride back to town tomorrow. Tonight I suggest we all get some rest. It's been a long day, and there's much to do in the coming week. Statements to take, evidence to catalog, a trial to prepare for. That night, with Deputy Clark guarding the wounded and securely bound Blackwell outside, Willow, Vaughn, and the marshal shared a simple meal in the cabin. The marshal detailed what would happen next. Blackwell would be transported to Phoenix for trial, where Willow would need to testify. Given the evidence and witness statements already collected, conviction was all but certain. "What will you do afterward, Miss Anderson?" the marshal asked as they finished their coffee. "Return to St. Louis," the question hung in the air, laden with significance. Willow's gaze drifted to Vaughn, who was studiously examining the contents of his cup. "I'm not sure," she replied carefully. "St. Louis holds painful memories now, and the West has shown me both its harshness and its beauty." A faint smile touched her lips. "I've discovered strengths in myself I never knew existed. The frontier has a way of revealing a person's true character," Marshal Davis observed, looking thoughtfully between Willow and Vaughn. "Some find they belong here more than they ever did in the so-called civilization of the East." Later, as the marshal slept and Blackwell remained secured outside with the deputy, Willow and Vaughn stepped onto the cabin's small porch to talk privately for the first time since their world had changed so dramatically in a single day. The night was clear, stars blanketing the sky above the dark silhouettes of pine trees. A cool breeze carried the scent of the forest, fresh and cleansing after the tension of the day. "It's really over," Willow said softly, gazing up at the stars. "Caroline will have justice. I can stop running." "Yes," Vaughn agreed, his voice equally quiet. "You're free now." The unspoken question lingered between them. Free to do what? To go where? "In St. Louis," Willow began hesitantly. "I was always Caroline's little sister. The quiet one, the sensible one. My life was planned out: a suitable marriage, a respectable home, children raised to continue the cycle." She turned to face Vaughn, moonlight silvering her features. "I never questioned it until Caroline died, until I had to find courage I didn't know I possessed." "You've always had courage," Vaughn said. "It just took the right circumstances to reveal it. Perhaps, but I've also found something else out here that I never had in St. Louis." She took a deep breath. "Freedom. The space to discover who I truly am, not who society expects me to be." Vaughn studied her face, hope warring with caution in his expression. "And who is that? Who is Willow Anderson when she's free to choose?" "A woman who's learned she can survive the harshest desert and the darkest fear," Willow replied, her voice growing stronger. "A woman who's discovered that home isn't necessarily a place, but a feeling of belonging." She reached out, her fingers lightly touching his hand where it rested on the porch railing. "A woman who finds herself reluctant to return to a life that now seems like a cage when she's tasted such freedom." Vaughn turned his hand to catch hers, their fingers intertwining. "Willow," he said, her name almost a prayer on his lips. "I told myself I wouldn't ask you to stay, that it would be selfish to want you to choose this life, this hard, unpredictable life, when you could return to comfort and security." "Comfort isn't the same as happiness," Willow said simply. "And security isn't worth much if it comes with a cage, however gilded." She stepped closer, her free hand coming to rest against his chest. "When you found me in the desert, you said you wouldn't leave me. You kept that promise through danger and hardship. Now I'm asking if that promise still holds, now that the danger has passed." Vaughn's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her against him. "I never intended it to have an expiration," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I need you to be certain, Willow. This life isn't easy. It's beautiful and free, yes, but also demanding and sometimes lonely. Not lonely if we're together, she whispered, rising on tiptoe as she had done before he left for Copper Springs, but this time her lips found his in a kiss that spoke more eloquently than words of certainty and choice, of a future chosen rather than accepted. When they finally parted, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Willow Anderson. I think I began loving you from the moment I found you in that desert, though I didn't recognize it then. And I love you, Vaughn Keller, she replied, her voice steady and sure. Enough to know that this you, this place, this life is what I choose. Not out of fear or gratitude or lack of options, but because it's where my heart has found its home. The trial of Thomas Blackwell became something of a sensation throughout the Arizona territory. Newspapers as far away as San Francisco carried accounts of the corrupt sheriff, his murdered wife, and the brave sister who risked everything to bring him to justice. Willow's testimony, delivered with quiet dignity despite the painful details she recounted, left few in the courtroom unmoved. When the jury returned a guilty verdict after less than an hour of deliberation, the sentence was swift and final. Thomas Blackwell would hang for the murder of Caroline Anderson Blackwell. Willow declined to attend the execution, choosing instead to visit her sister's grave in the small cemetery outside Copper Springs. Vaughn accompanied her, standing respectfully aside as she knelt to place wildflowers on the simple marker. I hope you found peace, Caroline, Willow whispered. You deserved so much better than the hand life dealt you, but you can rest now, knowing he can never hurt anyone else. As spring turned to summer, Willow and Vaughn were married in a small ceremony at Copper Springs' newly completed church, with Dr. Benson, Mrs. Abernathy, and Marshall Davis among the handful of guests in attendance. The marshal presented them with an unexpected wedding gift, the deed to a small parcel of land adjacent to Vaughn's cabin, granted by the territorial governor in recognition of their role in exposing corruption. It's not much, the marshal apologized, but the governor thought you might appreciate having official title to the land around your home. Home. The word held new meaning for both Willow and Vaughn as they returned to the cabin, now their cabin in the Dragoon Mountains. Together they expanded it, adding rooms and a proper garden. Vaughn continued his work as a trapper and guide, while Willow discovered an unexpected talent for botanical illustration, documenting the native plants of the region with scientific precision and artistic flair. Word of her work eventually reached the Smithsonian Institution, which commissioned her to provide illustrations for a scholarly work on desert flora. The income from this and subsequent commissions allowed them to further improve their mountain home, and occasionally indulge in luxuries like books and art supplies ordered from catalogs, and delivered to the growing settlement that had sprung up near Diablo Canyon. 2 years after their wedding, their first child was born, a son they named James, after the marshal who had helped bring Caroline's murderer to justice. A daughter, Caroline, followed 18 months later, inheriting her aunt's delicate features but her mother's determined spirit. On the 5th anniversary of the day Vaughn found Willow bleeding and alone in the desert, they stood together on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching their children play in the clearing as the setting sun painted the mountains in gold and crimson. You ever regret it? Vaughn asked quietly. Staying here instead of returning to St. Louis. This life is harder than the one you were raised for. Willow turned to him, the years having added subtle lines to her face but only deepening the clarity and purpose in her blue eyes. Never, she said firmly. Not for a single moment. She looked out at their children, at the home they had built together, at the wild beauty of the landscape that had once nearly claimed her life, but had instead given her a new one. "That day in the desert," she mused, "when I was certain I was going to die, my last thought was regret for all the things I hadn't done, the life I hadn't truly lived. Then you found me and refused to leave me, and everything changed." She leaned into his embrace, her head fitting perfectly against his shoulder. "You gave me more than my life that day, Vaughn. You gave me the courage to live it on my own terms." Vaughn tightened his arms around her. "You had that courage all along, Willow. You just needed the right moment to discover it." As darkness settled over the mountains they both now called home, the stars emerged one by one in the vast desert sky, the same stars that had witnessed their beginning, and now blessed their continuing journey together. From that desperate day in the desert to this peaceful evening surrounded by the family they had created, their path had been neither easy nor straight, but it had brought them exactly where they were meant to be, together, free and finally, completely at home.